So math is math and value is value, but in competitive TCGs, win rate tends to dictate all when it comes to how good a card is. Players may acknowledge a card's potential, understand its strength, and fear its implications, yet the label of broken remains not only elusive, but often taboo, until, of course, it consistently appears in top-tier tournament results, right? So today in Volume 2 of Busted Not Broken, we look at 5 cards in Fab that are clearly busted on their own, but yet still quite manageable within the wider context of the game.
A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando.
So in the first episode of this series, we outlined the problem statement, so to speak, but even that itself is a bit of a misnomer because it's, not a problem in the purest sense. See, in Flesh and Blood, there exist cards that are mathematically well above the curve within the game, yet are considered to be fine within the wider context of the game. So much so even that we've seen time and time again that a card can be seen worthy of the broken label only after it consistently manifests its dominance within winning decks. And today's cards live within that distinct range. They are well above curve, but yet live in an environment where they're not broken within the wider context of the game, at least not yet. On the surface, Everbloom Life is a pretty tame card. At a blue block 3 Earth card, it naturally is a top contender as an include, but its ability, at least in a vacuum, isn't all that powerful. A card from hand for 1 Arcane and a recycle of another card from graveyard, but yet back to deck. But where Everbloom Life crosses into questionable territory is the fact that it can recur another copy of itself. Multiple copies of Everbloom Life create a recursion scenario, which, in theory, can allow a player to gain infinite life over the game. Now, at only 1 life per card, this may on the surface seem like not a big deal, but keep in mind that, as a blue, it remains on curve with Sigil of Solace, but also blocks, and also fuses, for whatever that's worth these days. I'm sorry, but this card is just straight up cracked. Never mind that the concept of this card actually goes against the core design principles of the game in that every card matters. Do you all remember Drone of Brutality? Well, Pepperidge Farm remembers. Everbloom Life is a phenomenal example of the progressive development fallacy. Recall that prior to this card's release, Germinate saw a ban out of fear of the synergy with a then yet-to-be-spoiled card, Everbloom Life. Oh, this card that was a fundamental piece of this hero redeveloped several sets ago? Oh yeah, that card is clearly too design restrictive. Because of this other card, not yet released and with plenty of time to test and balance, but it's for our favorite barefooted hero that maybe also our weekly update person likes to pilot, yeah, we want to design that instead. So we'll just ban the previous card so that we can release a piece that creates an infinite recursion scenario. No big deal, kids. And now, to be fair, Germinate has returned, so we'll see how that plays out. But it's clear that if it doesn't play well, it won't be perceived as the fault of Everbloom Life. And let's be real, Everbloom Life will never be considered a broken card because it itself doesn't do stupid things. Furthermore, TCG players in general only conceptualize infinite loops when it comes to a lockout type combo. If it isn't instantaneous, forget about it. But if you want to talk design restrictive, this card is a pretty darn good example. On release, at a functional level, Oaken Old was Oldhim's specialization, and with the art featuring the old cranky grandpa himself, many actually just assumed it was at the time, except that of course, it isn't a specialization. Oaken Old is a solid example of how expanding card pools can wreak havoc with original card design and balance within Fab's silo design approach. In its day, Oaken Old was a 4-card hand, 1 to play, 1 to pay, and 2 to fuse, with a 1-card exception of course being Pulse of Isenloft. Getting those 2 cards in hand together required setup, as it is just shy of a 1% probability of that 4-card hand occurring naturally on the initial deck pass. However, with Jarl of Atradi and his Armory deck came Crumble to Eternity, a new Ice Earth card that can also be run as a 3-of. And while that alone only roughly quadruples the chance of enabling a 3-card hand, it significantly changes the case of stacking. The near simultaneous release of some incredible Earth cards in Rosetta, including defense reactions that can be used to fuse, then arsenaled to later defend and decompose, significantly changes the setup penalties around Oaken Old. The double fuse penalty is no longer as much of a drawback. For a card that comes in for a 9 dominate and stripping 2 cards on hit, not on crush mind you, but on hit. Recall that in October 2022, in the heyday of Oldhim and Classic Constructed, Pulse of Isenloft was actually banned from Classic Constructed. While part of that was the value in pitching that card to Oldhim's ability, its interaction with Oaken Old was a consideration and even directly mentioned. And now, there are more of such targets and overall better fuse cards. The card pool has evolved beyond where Oaken Old is a setup endgame tool. It's now an oops Oaken Old from the start, and it is clearly busted within the context of the new card pool. But math, value, and statistics are irrelevant, especially if you try and have that conversation with fatigue and control players. They rely on those, claim that knowledge of them makes them smarter than the rest of us, yet will default to, but he's not winning. So Oaken Old gets to languish in above-rate mediocrity, until, of course, things swing. Just imagine if this card had been made a specialization. Courage of Bladehold is one of the more impactful equipment pieces in the game under the right circumstances, enabling explosive turns for sword-wielding warriors. Courage of Bladehold's primary ability is an action that, upon destroying itself, will make all of your sword attacks cost 1 less resource for the turn. In addition to 2 defense with Temper, Courage of Bladehold's real strength lies in its ability to be destroyed for an all-out, game-winning turn. And it's this potential to facilitate a full turn of free sword swings that has incredible upside, especially in cases where weapons get free attacks. Kassai Cintauri Sellsword absolutely abused Courage in her day with a full-up Blood on her hands, enabling a complete momentum shift, or just outright winning entirely, on a turn requiring 0 pitch. And Boltyn's Saber Lumina combo deck completely relies on Courage to do its pop-off thing, with the main goal, of course, being to set up a turn where several copies of Lumina Ascension are played, enabling stacked bonuses and multiple swings, putting together a large number of powerful, Chane, Cintauri Saber attacks in one explosive turn. Courage making these swings free is critical to this combo, freeing up hand space to have the cards to do the thing. From a value standpoint, being able to block for 2 and then pop to effectively produce 2, 4, or even more resources is borderline absurd. Perhaps ironically, Warrior players might actually see a long-term benefit from the removal of this card. One can't help but wonder what support Boltyn may have gotten through the years, had it not been for the fear of double or triple Lumina turns with the free sabers. It's difficult to not imagine that Courage has played a role in the constant caution applied to Boltyn's supporting card design. But regardless, traditional warriors aren't dominating the meta by any stretch of the imagination, and right now at least, the best positioned warrior doesn't not only use Courage, but gets 0 benefit from it due to using daggers. As such, don't fret warrior fans, Courage will remain safe, at least for now. Continuing in the theme of 2 Temper chest slot equipment pieces that produce multiple resources on explosive turns, that's right brutes, it's your turn, we come to Savage Sash. Savage Sash turns a hand of a few cards into a devastating turn of 2-drop go-agains, or, in combination with a Blood Rush Bellow, this can put unrecoverable pressure on the opponent. The core ability of Savage Sash is an action that, upon destroying itself, will reduce the cost of all brute cards by 1 for the rest of the turn. On top of being a 2 defense with Temper, Savage Sash's real strength lies in its ability to be destroyed for a brutal, momentum-shifting turn. From just a raw value standpoint, being able to block for 2 and then pop for effectively 2 or maybe even 3 resources is pretty absurd when it comes to brute math, especially when those brute cards do the draw discard versus a discard from hand. And that is why Savage Sash pushes into the busted territory. It's honestly just due to brute math. Nearly everything costs 2, with the basic intent of a 4-card hand turning into a 2-drop draw discard, hope you get lucky, claw, and present another 2-drop. Heck, maybe an arsenal play just for good measure. Perhaps ironically, or admittedly, maybe not ironically, but intentionally, Savage Sash also suffers from progressive development fallacy. A previously existing card, Berserk, which, let's be honest, wasn't even super playable, was deemed to be design restrictive upon the release of Savage Sash and, actually, was even banned proactively. And from a certain point of view, this makes sense, because who in their right mind would have anticipated the release of a card that can do what Savage Sash does? Because, that would be busted in Brute, right? A swing big for 1 after a discounted Wild Ride on a Bella's turn? That's effectively the floor of this card. Even proactively, it's a 1-drop Wild Ride into a Pulping into an arsenaled Bare Fangs. Yet, here we are. But still, Brute isn't topping the charts. Even Kayo, the absolutely brilliant design balance hero with only 1 weapon, which is absolutely freaking brilliant, isn't topping right now. And let's be honest, somewhere within Savage Sash value math is the probability that the Brute player will brick at some point in the game. Otherwise, this card makes very little sense. I'm pretty positive that the only reason this card hasn't already been hit is because of Brute Nation, and of course the all-important detail about specifically being attack actions. Thank goodness for that Bloodrush Bellow isn't free, otherwise we'd be certainly having a completely different conversation. That said, and here's the rub that'll earn back those Brute-inspired dislikes, I contend that Sash isn't actually at its best on a Bellow's turn. A single blue for a 3-wide seems much better. Bellow almost always wants claws, and that eats the Sash value. Reduced to Runechant has been in the game since Arcane Rising, a fundamental and basic piece of the Runeblade toolkit. A 1-cost defense reaction that, on red, defends for 4 is by no means even playable, and Reduced producing a Runechant itself isn't even necessarily worth it, given a raw value of roughly 0.8 for Arcane. But it's that very important line there. Reduced to Runechant costs 1 resource less to play for each Runechant you control. Fun fact, that can even blow through Frostbites, abilities like Dauntless, or the new Super Slam Fable, assuming of course you have multiple Runechants. And it's that cost reduction that earns Reduced to Runechant its spot not only on this list, but at the top. Playing this card for free, which anyone playing this card in their deck is going to be able to do 99% of the time, is absolutely cracked in terms of value. 1 card at reaction speed with just shy of 5 value, 1 of which is offensive and presents mixed damage? Come on. Now, in all fairness, this card not only made a lot of sense, but was actually pretty necessary in the early OG Viserai days. If he set up something that left a Runechant on the table, he could piggyback that into this card for better value. But these days, in a world where Runechants are created willy-nilly, with not only no penalty, but also in duplicate due to Florian? Oh, and with Florian, also keep in mind that what helps you turn on the duplication ability is other defense reactions. Gross. Reduced to Runechant once existed in a world where leaving a floating chant wasn't necessarily desirable, or was a choice that your opponent made by letting your Nebula Blade hit. But as early as Crew, this card really made less and less sense. And in a world where Runechant stack builds are consistently mathematically favored, Reduced to Runechant is just beyond busted. At the very least, this card should be sidelined until Florian goes. But he's not winning, so hey, anybody want to buy my EA promos? Let's do this. So all of today's cards push the limits of value within the context of Flesh and Blood, but for various reasons are not broken within the current metagame. These 5 cards are clearly busted on their own, but yet are still manageable within the wider context of the game. And thus, they are busted, but hey, not broken. So my friends, what other cards do you believe fits this or similar criteria? Or on the other hand, were today's picks completely unhinged? I'm waiting for your comments, you fatigue Guardian people. Let's go, you know who you are, okay? So let me know below. And as always, thank you honestly for watching my Flesh and Blood friends. And of course, go Commando.